Angles. Yeah. Let's see.
Perfect.
I'll get in frame.
Yeah, there we go.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone can hear us fine. I guess the one issue I can't really check Zoom chat.
Here, I can.
Oh, right. Did that do it? No.
Just the volume on the actual computer.
That's what I'm.
Echo.
Put that in my guide. There you go.
That's what I hit and it didn't work. And we're still.
There we go.
We'll figure it out. A few kinks to work out in the whole process. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. My name is Jack Martin. I'm a reference librarian here at Patent Free. As some of you probably already know, Mary Kate Kwasnick, our archivist, moved on to a new position at the end of last month. We were so sorry to see her go and wish her all the best in her next endeavor. But we are also delighted to welcome her back already as a guest this morning. Oh, is that right? There we go. Hey, problem solved, no more echo. Thank goodness she's here. I don't know what we do without her. And on that note, would everyone please join me in thanking her for the 2 years of wonderful work that she gave us here at the library. She's only been gone a week and we already miss her absolutely terribly. Obviously, I still need her or I wouldn't be able to do this by myself, but thank you again, Mary Kate. Today's presentation is part of our History Room Live series. History Room Live is a monthly program where we aim to bring you speakers, collection highlights, and workshops that highlight the history of Maine and our communities. We run these as hybrid programs, so I have a few notes for our online attendees. This morning's presentation is a Zoom webinar, so you won't be able to turn on your camera or unmute yourselves. I think most of the people in our Zoom audience know the drill at this point, but just in case, the chat feature is still available, so please reach out through that if you run into any issues. If you have any questions for our speaker, please use the Q&A feature and we'll work through as many as time allows at the end of the presentation. If you need closed captions, you can turn them on by clicking the C button at the bottom of your screen. March is Women's History Month, and we are delighted to welcome Catherine Cyr here this morning to kick things off with a discussion of 3 historic women photographers of the Midcoast region. Catherine has an MA in American Material Culture from the Winterthur program, as well as a BA from Bowdoin College. I stole all of this from a Maritime Museum summary. Borrowed, I should say. She's been with the Maine Maritime Museum for nearly 2 years now and has recently become their associate curator. Without further ado from me, I'll turn things over to her. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I know we're a little shadowy here at the moment, but we're going to get going with the presentation. Oh, there's a little bit of light. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Perfect. Do that. Will you play? There you will. Perfect. I'm just gonna, whoop. I want to just make you go that way. Awesome. We looking all good over there on that side?
We didn't quite get the full screen over here.
Oh.
It's showing up in PowerPoint.
Still showing up in PowerPoint. Okay. Let's see. Do you want me to stop share and try again?
Yeah, let's see.
Okay. We're just gonna try again, and that's okay. Okay. Let's see. You're gonna share screen. I'm gonna do this one. And then we're gonna press play. Good now?
It's
still showing that.
We do still have your sidebar and all the like.
Oh, yeah. Okay, hold on. We're gonna get there.
Technical difficulties.
That's true, or like Jeopardy music.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
You do new share.
New share. Where?
Share.
Yep.
And then you should be able to like draw a box around just your PowerPoint rather than presenter.
So if I do that and then I say share, and then how do I draw the box? So it's showing me the end or the presenter mode on my end.
Find new share.
Play. How's that look?
You did it.
We did it! Woohoo! There we go. We just had to have some technical difficulty. Yeah, don't touch anything. Exactly. Yeah. You know, hey, it's Saturday morning. We're working the kinks out. That's okay. Well, good morning, everybody, both here in person and virtually on Zoom. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. As Jack said, my name is Catherine Cyr, and I am the Associate Curator over at Maine Maritime Museum. And today, sort of in the vein of yesterday being International Women's Day and March being Women's History Month, we are going to take a look and deep dive into an exhibition that I curated for the Maritime Museum at the end of 2022, titled Women Behind the Lens, the photography of Emma D. Sewell, Josephine Ginn Banks, and Abby F. Minot. And so we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. This is a question for the in-person audience, but who saw the exhibit? Woohoo! Okay, like 50%. We're good. Great. Well, don't worry. We're going to do a full overview of it today. But as you can see here, this is a nice image from the title wall of the exhibit, as well as the postcard that we sent out. As I said, the exhibit opened at the end of 2022 and was my first real big project at the Maritime Museum. I started in June of 22 and was immediately tasked with coming up with our next largest exhibit for that year, which is pretty daunting, especially when you think that's not a whole lot of time between June and December to come up from something from scratch. But my fabulous colleague, Kelly Page, sort of was like racking her brain, what can we pull quickly together? And she said, oh, well, you know, we have all of these photographs by these three women. And by all of these photographs, she meant 2,000, which I was like, okay, that's a good sample to work with. We can probably find something to do with that. And so that started later that summer, started diving into the lives of these three women that you see on the screen, learning about their work, learning about their personal lives, and really, you know, feeling like I sort of became their friend through the passage of time and history. So it's lovely to revisit them today, kind of pull them out from my brain and share them again with all of you. So to sort of help kind of understand how we get to the point of these three women here in the Midcoast area taking photographs, I think it's important that we all have sort of a general understanding of, well, how did we get here? And so it's important to understand that in 1939, Louis Daguerre develops the daguerreotype in France. This is the first time that we are getting what we call like the photographic process being able to be produced. And folks here in Maine know almost immediately. So the quote here was research found by the lovely and wonderful Earl Shuttleworth, our Maine state historian. And he had found in October of 1839 that Mainers are already reading about this process. So it's there. We're understanding that this is something new. It's exciting. But it's also very expensive and not super accessible. But 10 years later, there are 13 daguerreotypists working in Maine. 3 of them are actually here in Bath and 2 in Brunswick. Bath has the most daguerreotypists of any town in the state. And that's probably because of the immense amount of wealth that is sitting here in this town from the shipbuilding and merchant shipping process and markets. You know, you have people who have a disposable income, who want to use this new technology to document their lives, take pictures of themselves. It was a thing to share photos of one another for the first time because heck, it's a lot easier to share a small carte de visite, which is kind of like almost like a business card size photograph, than it is to share a painting, right? When we think about it that way, this is the first time that we're able to share that type of information. And at the bottom of your screen, you see that this is a daguerreotype of the Tempest, which was built here in Bath in 1849. It's one of the earliest photographs that we do have of Bath. And it's in the collection at Maine Maritime Museum. And we believe it was probably J.W.C. Morrison who took that. So kind of cool to put it into perspective of, we have these people working in Bath, and this is sort of the content that they're capturing. And then by the late 1860s, we're through the Civil War. We have two businesses directly situated on Front Street that are offering photography services. And my favorite thing about this image in particular of Pierce's studio is that if you look really closely, and I know you can't see my cursor, but his sign is an actual camera. So if you look to the second row of windows to the left, it's actually a camera as his business sign, which is really cool, and immediately tells folks walking down Front Street what he's offering as a service. And so here we have the photography business really beginning to explode on a professional level by the end of the 1860s. It's still relatively inaccessible to even those of a moderate and high income, but those things start to change by the time that we hit sort of the last quarter of the 19th century. And one of the biggest things that sort of revolutionizes the process is the creation of a dry glass plate negative. So prior to this, it actually was quite the process to even get ready to take a photograph. So we're working with glass. So you have, imagine, but sort of like a 5x7 piece of glass. And prior to the invention of the dry plate, you would actually have to create what was called an emulsion, and it was a wet process. So you would have to prep your plate, preferably in your studio, because it's safe, it's clean, dry. Get that plate ready, and then you could take the photograph. So what's probably not going to happen? Well, if it's a wet plate, you're not moving all that far because it's risky. You might affect the emulsion. So it doesn't allow you to take the camera out into the field in the same way that a dry plate does. And so the dry plate essentially takes that wet emulsion and it coats the plate, and you're ready to go. You can buy them pre-made, thanks to Eastman Kodak Company and George Eastman. Kodak is obviously a name that we all know, even to today. And also the Stanley brothers, right here in Maine, also had a dry plate business. They start in Lewiston and later moved down to Massachusetts. So now we have expedited the process of being able to take a photograph. We've made it easier. There's a little less science involved. And we also start advertising directly to women. And so women's magazines, such as Ladies' Home Journal, begins to recognize that women are an untapped market. Prior to this, a lot of professional photographers had been men. There were a few women out there, but certainly not to the extent of male professional photographers. And, well, women are interested. And Kodak really begins to understand this and thinks, oh, well, if I have this whole population of people at home with disposable incomes, potentially in the upper classes, who want to document their child's lives, their family activities, well, let's put a camera in their hand. So you start to see all of these ads, predominantly in like the 1880s and the 1890s, specifically calling out women and saying, hey, you can take your baby's picture. You can capture memories. You can create your own history. And then you also have people like Frances Benjamin Johnson, who becomes this wildly successful photographer, writing articles for women in these journals and in these magazines saying, this is what you can do with a camera. You can kind of tell your own history. And they're really trying to get to those sort of inner pieces of like, oh, this is something you can control. It can be a hobby that you enjoy as long as you have the means to do so. And then secondly, you see really this large rise in amateur photography clubs. The Boston Camera Club gets created and becomes wildly successful. You even have publications that are for amateur photography, where you are hearing about camera clubs, you're learning about the newest technology, you're hearing about people's work. So there's just this frenzy of what you can do with a camera, even as someone who is not professionally trained. But it is important to note that with this comes an expectation of wealth. This is not something that your average individual is going to be able to go out and do. A camera at this point, equivalency to today's dollars, is hundreds of dollars. So we're talking about disposable income here. And so it really is, you know, a privileged part of society that has this ability. And you're going to see that as we go through the three women that we're going to talk about today. So that sort of gets us set and ready to go. We understand sort of how we get to the fact that Emma, Josephine, and Abby can have a camera in their hands. So let's start chronologically with Miss Emma. And so Emma was born in 1836, right here in Bath, to Charles Crooker and Rachel Sewell. Her father was a lumber merchant and a shipbuilder, as if many of you who are versed in your local history likely know. She's educated here in Bath schools and is later sent off to the Ipswich Female Seminary in Massachusetts, which was sort of a finishing school, especially for women of higher classes. And then in 1859, she marries technically her third cousin, Arthur Sewell. Yeah, it's typical for the time period. And so she and Arthur, of course, make their home here in Bath. And they have two sons that live to adulthood that you can see pictured to the right of your screen. You have Harold Marsh Sewell, born in 1860, so about a year after their marriage, and then William Dunning Sewell, born in 1861. They do technically have a third child. However, he does die in infancy, unfortunately. And so Emma is an interesting case in the sense of when she picks up the camera. She does not actually start taking photographs until 1884. So she is, in all circumstances, middle-aged. Her husband at that point, in all of his business endeavors, is the president of the Maine Central Railroad. And she is traveling with him on all sorts of different rail journeys, and somehow decides to pick up a camera while she's traveling cross country. And she starts to experiment. And while we don't necessarily have as many of the early photos, especially in our collection at the Maritime Museum, we know that she really gets into the process and has a preferred printing method. She particularly likes platinum prints. Her great-great-granddaughter research, Abby Sewell, has said that Emma, quote, bought platinum-coated paper, exposed her plates in daylight, contact printed them onto the platinum paper, and then went through the 3 chemical process to develop and fix them. Finally, she washed the prints for about 45 minutes. So I love that in the sense that we actually get a sense of her process. And again, today we just think about pulling out our phones and we take a quick photo, boom, oh great, we don't like it, delete, try again, and we have 10 photos. That's not the process that we're doing in the 1880s. It's much more involved, it's much more detailed, and there is still a science and a chemistry background that is needed for that, which I think is sometimes undermined with her work. And so Emma, thankfully to us researchers and us historians, also likes to title all of her works. So we're lucky enough to know the title of most of her photographs, especially those that are in the collection here at Maine Maritime Museum. However, she doesn't date them very often, which is kind of a bummer. And she does not identify the people typically. So in the case of this image, which she titled Fisherman's Children, we do not know the name of these children, but it is still one of my favorite images in the batch that we have of about 60 in the collection at Maine Maritime, because it is just a wonderful scene into a fishing family and a fishing community. You can see the toddler not behaving in the other child's lap, typical toddler behavior. But you also get a look into materials and the equipment used by lobstermen and fishermen, which is great. And that sort of leads into a really major theme of Emma's work. And she tends to photograph settings and individuals that are far beyond her immediate social circle. These are images of subject matter that are quite removed from her daily life. You have to remember she's living up here on Washington Street, kind of the toast of the town, some people will say. But then she's going off and photographing fishermen, smelt stacks. She's also photographing cows in fields. And so there's this understanding by a lot of scholars that, you know, is she trying to capture sort of a way of life that is quickly disappearing in the 1880s and the 1890s as technology is changing our world, changing the way that we do our work? Or is she making some sort of claim of, well, this is idyllic and peaceful and wonderful, but I don't have to do it. Like, this isn't the life that I have to live. And so scholars have gone back and forth about that. And, you know, the jury's still out. And obviously we will never be able to ask Emma herself until a time machine is built. But I kind of land in the middle. I think that there is definitely a part of her work that she is recognizing that the world around her is changing. She herself is in her 50s and 60s. She's seen it change. You know, even her husband who started as, you know, wooden shipbuilding. That's changing, you know, in her own lifetime. But I also think that there is something to be said that she's romanticizing these views. You know, she can never understand the life of the fisherman who's on that boat. So I think it's a little bit of both in that sense, because, you know, she's not necessarily working for her dinner or having to make the money to make sure that her family survives. So that kind of then continues into this series of work that are, in this case, are reproduction prints that are created and titled by, again, her great-great-granddaughter, Abby Sewell, in the 70s for her fabulous book, Message Through Time, The Photographs of Emma D. Sewell. It is out of print now, but you can still find copies of it online, and I highly recommend it if you want to know more of. We have one here in the library. Perfect. So come check it out. It's if you want to learn more about her work and see some more images, because I can only share a short bit of it today. But I particularly love these series or this type of work, again, because she is showing labor. She's showing industries that are, in a sense, on the decline. This is a hand loom. You know, textiles are not being mass produced on hand looms anymore by the end of the 19th century. So again, there is this sense of, you know, a time going by or a time slipping away from us. And I also think it's really interesting that given the time period that this be, you know, again, that really last decade of the 19th century, you know, this is the point in time when the colonial revival is really hitting its sprint and its time. We've had the Columbian Exposition, the White City in Chicago in 1893, and there is this big understanding that, oh my goodness, you know, our country is now over 100 years old. We have this established history. We want to remember it. We want to memorialize it. And so there is this push amongst artists, both in fine arts and in photography, to create images that invoke our colonial past, that connect us back to that history. And I think that there's a part of that with her. And we know that she is seeing that kind of work because of the groups that she's in. So she's in this headspace, she's in this mind space, she's being introduced to it, and I think it is influencing, and as we'll see in a few minutes, it's very much to her benefit and to her success. But to that point, she does capture life as she knows it as well. So we have up at the top, Small Point, where she and Arthur later build the dunes, their camp, or really, really, nice cottage. And that case, this is the Anderson cottage. You have a nice little picnic on Popham there, which this is one of those rare or few dated 1886. So she is capturing those within her own social circle, and there are other images like this within the collection. And then I wanted to include this one as well, because it is just a really amazing photo that ties again to some larger artistic movements that are happening during this period. And that's pictorialism, where there's this, we need to make photography look like fine art. Because now we know photography can be a one-for-one like image. It can capture real life, but we want it to be taken seriously as an artistic art form. And so how we do that is by, and you can look up other individuals, but a lot of it is this really like soft focus, very romantic settings, dramatic. I mean, look, we've got the person perched on the edge of the rock with their umbrella, the crashing wave. And again, there's just this fuzziness, almost like you're looking through like saran wrap or something, which I think is really pretty. And so with all of that, Emma is not necessarily keeping her photography to herself. She decides that she wants to be a part of other groups. And so that includes the Postal Photographic Club out of Fitchburg, Massachusetts, which has been founded in 1888. It encompasses members from across the country. And essentially what you would do was send your work in, and then it would be published in sort of a catalog. And she started winning awards. And then in 1894, she joins the Boston Camera Club that I mentioned a few minutes ago. She's the first woman admitted to that club, and she's also one of the oldest members. So she's really stepping into the boys' club in this case as a middle-aged woman. And again, she starts winning awards. She is consistently mentioned in, I love the column here in the middle that's called Camera Gossip, about the Boston Camera Club, about her work being this just of amazing quality. She talks about, there's mention that she's rivaling Alfred Stieglitz, which if you know anything about photography, especially at the end of the 19th century in America, Stieglitz is like the pinnacle. So here you have this untrained woman from Bath who picked up a camera at her 50s and is taking these incredible photos that are rivaling some of the best in the country. But she doesn't stop here in America. She continues and she goes to Paris. And in 1895, she submits 4 works, which you can see on this. This technically is her acceptance to the Photo Club of Paris's photography exhibition. She has 4 works. That's like some of the most by any American. And these are people from all over Europe who are admitting work to this space. And then she goes back in 1897, and she goes back in 1898. And we actually know that she went to the actual exhibit in 1895 because we have her ticket stub and we have the program that she picked up, which is really cool. And I can't imagine, as somebody who led, especially as she got older, a pretty quiet life. There's lots of talks because, of course, her husband ran as the VP on the Democratic Party ticket in the late 1890s. And she very rarely did interviews or rarely wanted to talk about herself. So she's pretty, as she got older, confined and, quiet woman. Going to Paris, going to the City of Lights and seeing her work just on the wall with all these other people that she's probably read about, that she's probably admired. I wish I could know or kind of be a fly on a wall during that time. And not only is she displaying work in Paris and getting it accepted, but she's also winning winning awards. So in the last exhibition that she displayed in Paris in 1898, she exhibits this piece here known as When the Day's Work is Done, and received a silver plated Medal of Honor, which you can see on the screen there, which I was lucky enough to have family members contact me after the exhibit went up and said, hey, do you want it for the exhibit? And so I was able to display it alongside her work. We don't have a copy of When a Day's Work is Done, but it still was really, really wonderful to add it alongside this scrapbook, that all of these sort of pieces, if I go back, like this stuff is all in the scrapbook, which is 99% about Arthur, about her husband, about all of his amazing accomplishments. And then there's about 5 pages at the end where she's tucked all of this work about herself. So she was proud. And it's, I think, just really wonderful that we've been able to sort of reignite interest and understanding of what Emma's truly remarkable accomplishments were. But unfortunately, Emma's photography career was quite short in regards, especially to the other women that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, because unfortunately, Arthur passes away pretty unexpectedly in 1899. And then in 1900, a woman that was technically her niece, I believe by marriage, named Alice, who had lived with the family for many years and become a close, confidant and friend, died. And Emma's devastated. And so she sort of retreats herself to the dunes, the cottage on Small Point, and she gives up her camera. And she resigns from the Boston Camera Club, and she just kind of disappears into the history book for about 20 years, because it wouldn't be until 1919 that Emma passes away. But she lived this incredible life. And again, I think it's so powerful and so important to keep recognizing that this was not a young woman. It was a woman who would have been considered sort of past her prime. This is somebody who, is supposed to be hosting parties here in Bath for her husband and supporting him on the campaign trail, but she's out there doing this incredible work. And so that's Emma's life. But now we get to go to Josephine Ginn Banks, who probably is someone that nobody has heard of unless you saw the exhibit. And that's because her photographic work is pretty much unknown until this exhibit. So much to the fact that Earl and Libby Bischoff, who is the executive director over at the Osher Map Library, whose work has predominantly been in photography and especially Maine-based photography, never heard of her, did not know about her. But Maine Maritime is lucky enough to be the home of 1,200 images by Josephine that for the first time we got to display. And so Josephine Ginn Banks, also known as Jo by family and friends, was born in 1863 in Prospect. So we're going to go ahead up the Midcoast for a bit, and then we're going to come back down with our last woman. She was the daughter of Alfred Alonzo, or Lon Ginn, and his wife Henrietta. But interestingly enough, there's a little drama because Josephine was born out of wedlock. Josephine was born 18 days before her parents' marriage, which I think is a fun, just a little tidbit. The fact that her father was a sea captain, I think might indicate that maybe there was a little bit of activity before her parents were married, and that maybe Alonzo came back from sea and was like, oh, well, guess I figured out life. But obviously, of course, that's all speculation. But Josephine lives with her parents at Bowden Point in Prospect, and sort of grows up knowing about sort of the trade and life at sea, as her father is predominantly sailing back and forth between Europe and the West Indies. We know that as a child, she did go with her father to Holland, so she at least makes one visit to Europe with him. But mostly for the as far as we know, stays pretty close to Bowden Point, right there in Prospect. In 1899, she runs away to marry Charles E. Banks, who is the son of a seaman from Stonington. And I suspect again that this elopement probably occurred because Charles would probably have been seen a bit below her standing, especially as the only daughter of a prominent sea captain. Charles worked as a stonecutter and would travel for work quite frequently. And so he and Jo would spend their lives in a few different places, including Stonington. They also go up to Vermont at one point. So we have some photography that she took while she was there. But then they come back to Prospect and appear to live within the family compound. She and Charles have no children. But I think, as you'll see in some images, that didn't mean that she didn't live as a fulfilling life. And so to think about what Josephine photographs, children and babies. This is predominantly the major theme within her work. And I can't help but wonder, as somebody who did not have any children, if this is kind of what she lived vicariously through. Because you can't look at those photos and not just smile and see the absolute adorableness and love and sassy behavior of toddlers that she was able to capture. And not only that, not only is she capturing the personalities of these children so beautifully, I included the photo on the left of Sadie Boyd and her mom in the exhibit, even though Sadie's face is a blurry, because I just, thinking about the technical aspect of having a toddler sit for a photograph and just the finger in the mouth, and her mom is just like, she's serving a look, if we're going to give one, which I think is fantastic. But there is just so much wonderful personality, but also technical ability in these photographs. The center photograph, the amount of breaking light that is hitting that baby's face, she knew what she was doing. Like, she set that up. She had the light where she wanted it. And we'll see in a few minutes that she also really thought about the compositions of her work. But another aspect that I really love is that she captured children as they grew up. So this is Hilda Avery, and you can see the photos on the right are of her probably about, maybe like about 1 year old or so in 1912. And then 4 years later, she's capturing Hilda again, now with her sister Anna. And again, I love seeing the behind the scenes aspects of Jo's work. Mom needing to stand there to hold the toddler steady, or picking her up and trying to cover herself with a blanket so you don't see her. But again, just the smiles and the personality, because I think we always think about photographs, especially old ones, people are so stern. And, there is something to be said that, yes, exposure time was long, but it wasn't that long that you had to stay so still. You did have to stay still. But just smiling children. I mean, you can't help it. And what's lovely is that this is a maritime community in which the people get to be the star. And it's fantastic. But also, she's using props, and she's thinking about, like I said, composition. So this girl with a book, because again, Josephine didn't tend to title her photos. If you look really closely at the photo album she is holding, that is the same photo that you see in the upper corner, which is really spectacular. So here Josephine has sat that little girl, given her a photo album of her own work, and then photographed her with it, which is just so cool. You know, we actually have these prints in the museum's collection, and it's the mail team crossing the river, getting it back and forth while the ice is hard enough to be able to travel that way, which is fun. But then if you look at the photos at the bottom, you also see that these are two different babies, but it's the same high chair. So she continuously is using the same props in her photos. That screen that you see behind, and I know the older boy in that photo he's not super happy to be in that photo. He hasn't quite learned the angles of his face yet, but that movable, collapsible screen, that shows up in other photos that she takes. So it's just really cool. And then also on top of that, she's thinking about different techniques. She's really experimenting. So the three children on the left, which again, I always like to say when I was in the gallery, which one are you today? You know, out of which, what are you feeling? How are your feelings today? What she is doing is that's actually paint. So if I had the glass plate in front of me, she used red paint. And essentially she is trying to white out or create a border around the photos. So if you've seen some photos, particularly in the early 20th century, right, that like teens period, there's often this like soft white background, almost like a halo around them. That's what she is trying to do with those prints. And there are a number of these glass plates in our collection where she's painted. In some cases, she even inscribed the area. So if we go back, we see that she wrote Stonington on the little baby there. Sometimes she dated the photos, which were really great. But then she's also thinking about different photographic processes. So cyanotype, this is a nice labor scene. And then she's also doing hand coloring. And how can you not love the doggy in the bottom corner, that she's given some nice, you know, reddish brown hair too. And then on top of the amazing portraiture work that Jo is doing, she's also taking some really incredible scenes of Stonington in particular. I love what she's doing up in the top corner. She's essentially made a panorama view by stitching two photographs together. And then this one down here in the corner is just a really lovely shot, taken clearly from a angled position, so that you can see the harbor and see the homes and everything. And I had a woman come up to the exhibit from Stonington who was blown away by some of these images because they'd never seen them before. So I was able to go back through all of the photos that we have, and I sent her copies of all of the Stonington scenes so that she could have them, because she's on the board of the Granite Museum up there. And we're hoping to potentially in the near future get a small show up of Josephine's work up on Stonington, so that folks in the community can see scenes of the places that they frequent today, at some point, which is really cool. And last but not least, I think the best part of Jo's story is, well, one, this cool self-portrait that she's taking with her camera in front of a mirror, is that in 1910, in the census, she identifies herself as a photographer, as her occupation, which pretty unheard of. Now, we don't know where it says industry, she writes at home, and then where it says asks if you're self-employed or not, she says on own account. So I've been in contact with some descendants of Jo, from kind of the extended family branch. They do not believe she was ever paid for her work. It was kind of, photography was her identity. It was sort of how she saw herself, how she went about her world. But that it was a really serious hobby for her. But I would love if somewhere in one of those attics up there in Prospect or something, there's that little slip of paper that one day maybe can tell us that even if it was a barter situation and that she got, you know, a dozen eggs or something for a photograph, I think it'd be really cool. Because here you have this woman who has taken clearly what is a love for this medium and turned it into a self-identified profession. And so to end, Josephine unfortunately loses her husband unexpectedly in 1919. He dies of consumption or tuberculosis, as far as we know. And so she ends up living with her parents, and then within the next 2 years, she loses both of them. And at that point, she moves away from Prospect, the sort of place in her home that she's always known, and ends up in Worcester. And she spends the rest of her life there for another 30 years because she doesn't pass away until 1958. She lives this really long life. And we can thank her first cousin who took all the glass plate negatives out of the house when the house was sold. And gave them to the museum in the 90s. And that since then, they've pretty much just sat there until we were able to finally showcase this really spectacular work. I truly do think that she, you know, all three of these women have their own strengths and weaknesses within their own work, but there's something I just really, really love about Josephine's work, and being able to share that with the public for the first time was pretty awesome. And so finally, we'll move to our last lovely lady, Miss Abby Minot, who is born on Christmas Eve in 1847 in Phippsburg. She's the daughter of Charles V. Minot Sr. and his wife, Sarah. And she's the youngest of 3 surviving children. She has a much older sister, Alice, 14-year age difference, and then an older brother, Charles Jr., which there's a 6-year age difference. And she and Charles form this pretty special bond that we'll explore a bit more in the future. But she grows up in the Macabre Hill Minot House, or as you likely know it today as the 1774 Inn. And here you can see this lovely photograph of the house, and we believe it's a couple of the family members standing out in front of it. She is sent off to school at Hebron Academy and graduates in 1849. And then she comes back home to Phippsburg. And unlike her counterparts that we've explored today, she does not marry, and nor does her sister. And there's some understanding that maybe her dad was a bit protective of Alice and Abby and needed them at home, especially to care for their mother, who was considered a bit sickly. But that doesn't stop Abby from living a really wonderful and fulfilling life. She's very active in the Phippsburg community. She's always mentioned in local papers. She's performing at the Grange Hall. She's at weddings, so on and so forth. But I think it's in 1898, very different, it was 1998, that I think Abby kind of finds her identity. And that is because she gets her camera. And so remember I said that she and Charles Jr., her brother, had a pretty close relationship. I love that there's a letter somewhere in the collection at MMM where Abby writes to Charles as he's at Bowdoin and says, "I snuck away to Bath today. Dad didn't even know. And I got to do everything and walk down and go to the shops and everything." And she's like, "I just miss you terribly. Won't you come home?" And I think it's funny for us to think, he's just in Brunswick. He's not that far. But at that time, you're not hopping in the car to go see your brother. So it's solidified in this letter here that you see from 1898, where this magical unknown person, L.J. Little, is contacted by Charles Jr. to purchase a camera for Abby. And so the letter actually states that L.J. Little is sending the camera for Charles's sister. So we know that this is Abby's camera. And then this is the actual camera. This is the Poco B accordion box camera that we have in the collection at Maine Maritime that we receive alongside all of the 600 or so glass plate negatives of Abby's work from her niece, Ada Haggett. And we were able to display this camera again, like for one of the first times in this exhibit. And so now with a camera in hand, an education, the world in front of her, starts taking pictures. And we know, at least at some point, she's with other young women that are taking photos. Again, I wish this wasn't as blurry as it is, but I actually think the blurriness kind of can add to the appeal of it as well. But you see at least 2 cameras there on tripods. And we know, and then the third had to be taking the photo, obviously, but Abby is with some sort of group. So it's not a formal group as far as we know, not like the ones that Emma was a part of, but still cool. Like she's in this environment where she's with like-minded individuals taking photos. And those kind of photos vary. Here we have a bunch, none of these were in the exhibit, but I thought it would be fun to share a few new ones where she's capturing a play in Phippsburg. She's capturing a picnic. This lovely photo with the 3 ladies and the flowers. And in fact, Abby is the individual on the left of those 3 ladies. And then also, she's doing a lot of staged shoots, kind of in the same way that Josephine was at her house, the 1774 Inn, where they're wearing costumes. And this one I think is interesting because those are not dresses that you are wearing in the 1890s or 1900s. Those are like 1860s dresses. So they're playing dress up essentially and taking photos of each other, which are fun. She's also out in her community, far and wide. You know, we have the ice house in Phippsburg that she's capturing with ice piled up. And, you know, normally that's what winter looks like, but not so much the winter we've had this year. We also have Merry Meeting Park, the casino, which is this great image of this amazing place. If you do not know about Merry Meeting Park, Google it. It is so cool. There was a zoo, there was an amphitheater. You took the trolley in just right there along the river in Brunswick. So here she's capturing a day out, but she's also capturing scenes a little closer to home. We have a sloop with 2 men passing Doubling Point. And if you squint, you can see Percy and Small Shipyard, now the home of Maine Maritime Museum. And then you have her standing on the steps of the Sagadahoc courthouse, taking a photo of the Civil War monument and this man who's taking a rest with his horse at the fountain. And, you know, you got maize in the background, right? You know, so all that. But really, the strength of her work is the shipyard images. So Abby is the daughter of a shipbuilder, and she has this unparalleled access living right next door to a wooden shipyard in Maine. And she takes her camera and takes some of the best images that we have of the wooden shipbuilding process in Maine. Here you see the 4-masted schooner Ada F. Brown in frame. And then you can see images like this. And she really captures from the very beginning of the shipbuilding process to the very end. So here, that same schooner is in frame. So we're jumping back in time technically with the top photo. And then the bottom photo is after a launching. And with these images, we are able to get a really good understanding of the shipbuilding process that happened right here in our backyard. And then one other cool thing that I don't think any of us really knew until I started digging through documents is that Abby's photos apparently went on picture postcards at some point. So the family ran what was known as the brick store. Actually, if we go back, we can see in the photo there, it's like the general store, but also kind of acted as the sort of headquarters for the shipyard. But this George S. Graves had a photo postcard business, and he and Charles, again, Abby's brother, have this correspondence back and forth in 1907, 1908, where it is very clear that Charles is sending the glass plate negatives that Abby is producing to Graves to produce postcards that likely then they were selling back in the brick store. Where those exist, I do not know. We have not come across any. Again, maybe they're in somebody's attic here in town, or maybe they'll just pop up on eBay one day. If you see one, let me know. I want to know about it. But it's really cool to think that, again, Abby's photos were being seen by a wider audience and that she was actually promoting what Phippsburg was, what Phippsburg looked like. And so not much is known about Abby's later life, especially after the shipyard closes. We know that she ends up living with Charles Jr. and his wife and their daughter Ada. She kind of spends time back and forth, winters in Boston with them, and then is in Phippsburg in the summer. And when Charles dies, she stays with her sister-in-law, and they live in New York City. And kind of life goes on and until 1944 when she passes. And again, thanks to the forethought of a descendant in terms of Ada, who meticulously documented so much of Abby and the greater Minot family's work, she gave them to the museum so that we have and are able to share, which is just fantastic. And so that's Emma, Joe, and Abby, and just a small little insight into their work and into their lives. And, I like I said, I feel like I kind of became friends with them as I learned about them. And, again, when we build that time machine, I'm going back and I'm asking a bunch of questions because I've got a list. But I hope that you've all enjoyed learning about their lives as much as I did researching them and taking a step back in and seeing maybe some familiar scenes that you maybe drive by even every day. And I would be remiss to not promote some upcoming things happening at the museum. So these are my two latest projects that I have been working on. Lost and Found is now open. It is a sound-based exhibit and is really cool. Come and listen to works produced by Diane Ballin, a local sound artist, from Foghorn at Portland Headlight to bells within Maine Maritime's own collection. And then, as we've liked to say, opening for the season is Up to Camp in the first weekend of April. And this is going to be the museum's first real opportunity to delve into inland waterways and the way that they have produced recreation and outdoor heritage and tourism in terms of traditional camp culture. So lots of exciting things still to come at Maine Maritime. I hope you will all join us very soon. And thank you. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, I have questions. Do you want to do questions in the audience first and then?
Yeah, go ahead and take them from the audience first.
Perfect.
How did the museum come to get all the bank's photographs?
So it came from, let me get her name right. So it was a first cousin, I think it was, Wilma, right? This is where I have to pull out the notes. So it's Wilma Josephine, Voss, in the 90s, shows up with all of these glass plate negatives, most of them in original glass plate negative boxes that we saw early on in the presentation, as well as 2 binders of contact prints of all the glass plate negatives. So why she came to Maine Maritime, I don't particularly know, but I think she recognized that they would be at home in an institution that celebrated, Maine's maritime, heritage and culture, and thought that it was an appropriate space for them.
Did the museum know anything about this woman prior to that?
That's a great question. Since I was a baby at that point, I would not know. I know exactly, right? Nathan was not as familiar with them. But if you, yeah, if anybody knows out there, anything more about Josephine and her family, that would be fantastic. So, yeah, another one?
Yeah, one other thing, there's a huge collection of postcards that was made. I forget what was his name. Do you have some of those here, in the room up here? Postcards.
Oscar Marsh collected,
Excuse me?
Oscar Marsh
Oh,
collected,
Oscar Marsh, he had thousands and thousands of these postcards.
they're in there.
They're in there.
All the bath postcards.
Yeah.
So for folks online, they're talking about a collection that's here at the library of Oscar Marsh, who took a bunch of postcard images. Or collected them, sorry, misspoke, collected them and they're here.
How many thousands there are?
So there are lots of them.
That's a place to take a look.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I had a hand over here. We'll do red sweater first. Well, that's right.
I'm wondering if you know that those items were from them, are they credited or just because they came in a collection?
Great question. Mainly, we know, especially with Emma's, we can match handwriting on the back of the photos to her own handwriting. And again, given that they were published in many places that of being her work, we can say, yes, Emma made those photos. The other ones, yeah, we couldn't probably say as precisely that they are definitely, but I think there are enough coincidences. The fact that Josephine is taking self-portraits with a camera, and she very rarely shows up in any of the photographs herself. And then Abby, we know, thanks to, again, those meticulous notes that Ada Haggett wrote, because Ada grew up with Abby in the household, grew up knowing her aunt as a photographer. And so we can attribute or confidently say that all of those works are hers.
I was wondering, because my son is a amateur historian, he does the good old days of Bath.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
and he's got tons of the stuff, but he wouldn't know, I don't think he'd know.
Yeah.
Credited to.
Exactly. Yeah. It can be really hard. Really good reminder. Always sign your work. If you want people to know about it in the future, sign it, date it, and protect it so that we as historians have an easier job. Not saying I don't love a good, rabbit hole search, and like putting all the puzzle pieces together. But, when I can get one win here or there and it's easy, it's a little better.
One more
Yeah,
thing.
go right
I
ahead.
noticed that Stool called weaving quilting, which to me was like a hint that she
Really doesn't know. I know. So it's, yeah, there's just, again, I want to ask her questions. But, yeah, so. Yeah, and there's like one of the ones that she so we're talking about Emma's photographs and the fact that the image of the woman weaving is named quilting, but one of the photographs that she enters in and gets exhibited at the Paris exhibition in '97 is called Old Blacksmith. I don't know what that one looks like, but I have some thoughts about maybe what it was, or is he actually blacksmithing, or is he just standing in a blacksmith shop, or, is he by a forge type thing? So yeah, it's interesting because again, she's not doing that manual labor. So there, I think there is something to be said that when you can make a connection, you understand how, a body moves, how it does a process, that allows you to understand it better. And as an outsider, as she very much would have been seen. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was just wondering, back in the days of when these women were around, a lot of women kept diaries, and I wondered if you've had any luck at all.
So Emma has some letters. We have, as probably many of you know, we have the Sewell family papers at the Maritime Museum, which is many, many, many boxes of documents. And I went through the letters that she specifically wrote to see if there was any mention anywhere that she talks about photography. And no, doesn't. She talks about painting in one letter, because there was I think a cousin or something who would paint in the White Mountains in the summer. And she often would go, and I think that was one of the letters that she had gone for a rest, for a retreat to the White Mountains, to take the airs, and was painting, but nothing about photography. Which I'm like, oh, again, why couldn't you have told me something? I don't have anything written about for Josephine. There might be some more stuff up in Prospect. I know when I, again, contacted the Prospect Historical Society about Josephine, they mentioned that there's likely more work out there, of hers. So I don't know how many more works, but there are some. And then Abby, again, there's some letters back and forth, as like a teenager to her brother and to other family members. But again, nothing that specifically mentions photography. And no diaries. Again, search those attics. I'm gonna keep making a plea for it. Perfect. Zoom questions?
We had one online that was, would you call the amateur photography movement the beginning of social media?
Oh, well, I mean, there is something to be said about it is a media, especially if we're sending it back and forth. And if we want to say it's social and the fact that it's a group of friends who are sharing photos, maybe say it. I don't know. I think it shows that there has always been sort of a desire or a want to share work. And I think that especially with photography being new, there were a lot of questions, and who better to ask than the people who are doing the work alongside you or also experimenting. I mean, heck, that still happens with, think of Facebook groups today that you can ask about photography or any sort of hobby. I think, when you find a community, and in this sense, this one was a relatively new one, yeah, it's exciting to share and want to know and learn more. So
Closer to Reddit than Instagram.
yes. Yeah, we have another question in the audience.
These photographs, they're individual photographs in home situations. Was there any, first of all, were there commercial photography studios in Bath during this time? And secondly, were any of them operated by women, or was that somehow foreclosed to them because women didn't do commercial business? Or were there other factors because people can go in and, as a milestone, get their family portrait at some point.
Yeah.
But it doesn't sound like these three photographers were involved in that more commercialized aspect.
Yeah, so the question was in regards to the three women working on the sort of a commercial professional standpoint, and whether there were professional female or women photographers here in Bath. The answer is no, as far as I know. There were professional women photographers in the country, and if I'm not going to remember the name off the top of my head, but I know there was at least one woman in and around this time period that was operating in Maine. You can learn more about her in the Maine photography book written by Libby Bischoff and Earl Shuttleworth, and I'm forgetting the third author's name off the top of my head. But Libby, because her research has always focused really heavily on photography and women's photography. She delved into other women within the state. Penobscot Marine Museum also has a really great collection by a women photographer. Again, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but she, again, came from a seafaring family and took photos while she was traveling aboard vessels, which is really cool. So there are pockets here and there, but no, not so much in the professional standpoint. I think it was very much seen that it was not a business necessarily for women, but it was very much an acceptable hobby, if that sort of makes sense. Yeah. Awesome. We're all good online. Well, again, for everybody joining us via Zoom, thank you so much for joining us and bearing with us in our technical difficulties. And to all of you here in person, thank you for making it out on a Saturday morning, and have a good rest of your day.